don't believe that it's that, incredibly difficult to create artificial intelligence.
Hello and welcome to Retech, and today we're going to cover a little bit of ground that was attempted to be covered by the 8-bit guy, David Murray. Now, before we get lots of comments here, it's not to kind of put his ideas into kind of a this isn't worthy or this isn't working or he doesn't know what he's on about kind of scenario, because there's nothing to do with that. What I'm going to do is look at it from the perspective of what he was trying to do, and also adding to it and basically giving a little bit more of a grounding in artificial intelligence, basically, and whether or not, as David's original title was, is artificial intelligence out there? Well, for start off, artificial intelligence is a very, very difficult subject to master, and it's also a very emotive one, because it kind of conjures up different images to different people. And the kind of popular image of AI is the doomsday, end of the world scenario, where machines get more advanced than humans, and they develop a conscience, and they decide that it must be the end of the world for human beings. And that's one look at it, and it's kind of a very old look at it now. It's kind of a little bit outdated. The other look at it is where you have AI helping, being the kind of serf or slave to humanity, which is like a constant helping robot or a machine or a computer that actually all it does is helps human beings and so on. So it's either a very optimistic view or a very detrimental view, depending on which side of the fence you fall on and which kind of genre of science fiction you're kind of watching as well. And I'm guessing that's where the 8-bit guy David Murray was originally kind of coming from, and that was the kind of middle ground based on maybe science fiction and popular culture. And popular culture is one of the biggest hurdles in AI to kind of leap over, so to speak, because everybody's seen the movies, everybody's watched TV, everybody's read books about how bad it can be and so on. Now, artificial intelligence as an entity is massively complicated. It's not something we can really touch much upon in this video. We'll have a go at touching on part of it, but it's definitely not something that you could kind of all encompass in a very short video, which was kind of intended with David's original video, because it was asking the question on how you get AI, and one of his comments was that it should be very easy to replicate a person or replicate the way we think.
In fact, just myself, I have come up with 3 possible ways that it could be done. And the first way is by copying what we already have, the human brain. Much like I can emulate this Commodore 64 inside of a modern computer by running an emulator, I suspect that it would be possible to emulate a human brain inside of a computer program.
Well, it's not. It's not easy at all. In fact, it's incredibly complicated and complex. Now, it's kind of a flippant comment to say that it should be easy, but it's not. And that's where I think things got muddied with the original video. I think it was well intentioned, but I think things got slightly muddied in the video. So what we're going to do today is, rather than cover the more complicated side of AI, which we wouldn't have time to do here, we're going to cover 3 essential parts, which are the 3 forms of AI and what they can and cannot do. So let's start with the first one. And the first one is artificial narrow intelligence, which is kind of limited. It's very limited. It's where roughly most of us are now, as in our leaps and bounds with our technology since the 8-bit era all the way through, and it's very limited artificial intelligence. It's basically based on algorithms, which is a set of rules which, artificial intelligence or the simulation of intelligence has to kind of abide by, and can be a very complicated set of rules and a very, very complicated algorithm. But essentially we are at the limited end of AI. You got things like Siri, Alexa, Google Assistants, even smart TVs with voice activation and so on, and that's at the beginning of the spectrum. Now, it's come on in leaps and bounds as compared to what it was only a decade ago, and it will keep on growing and come on in bigger leaps and bounds, and it's very useful. It's very useful as a prediction tool. It's very useful as your home assistant. It's very useful in kind of helping businesses weigh up risks and scenarios to whether or not to invest in something. It's incredibly useful for insurance companies, whether weighing up, how much for risk a certain product is and so on. And it's the same for weather. It's the same for almost everything we do today is based on this version of AI. And for a lot of our daily lives and a lot of the things we do, this narrow form of AI is about as much as most people would ever need, because it's an assistant. It helps. Some people say in some occasions it's a hinder, but then that is only as good as its algorithm. Now, this form of AI is generally not where the 8-bit guy was coming from. It was not the form of AI where most of the movies are coming from and TV programs, because it wouldn't make a very good program and it wouldn't make a very good science fiction novel, and it's not something that kind of catches the imagination in the same way as a kind of a dystopian style future. Now, to get to the point we have gotten, it has involved leaps of technology, and basically it needed those leaps because originally, maybe around the kind of 10-15 years ago, we didn't have the power in our hardware to be able to have an assistant, a Google Assistant or whichever one you have, or even to do really accurate weather predictions like we have now, down to the minute in a lot of cases. And again, this is artificial intelligence that is an assistant. It does good generally for humanity and it helps out.
Okay, so now I'm going to tell you why I think artificial intelligence already exists and why I think it's being hidden from the world. So first of all, there are people way more intelligent in this world than I am. And if I can figure this stuff out on my own, then it goes without saying that other people that are smarter than me would also be able to figure it out. In fact, I'm pretty sure that given time, I could create artificial intelligence. It might take me 20 years, but I think I could do it.
Now, the next form is artificial general intelligence, okay? AGI, if you want to shorten it down. And that's the form of where a lot of science fiction programs and a lot of popular culture thinks AI is. It's where we should be with AI, but it's not where we are at the moment. AGI is your almost equivalent to a human being in the way it thinks and thought processes and patterns and how it is able to react to situations and so on. Well, we're kind of decades or more away from that, because it's not something that's just around the corner. We've kind of struggled to get to the narrow form of AI, and to take that next leap is going to be a game changer. It's going to need a completely different way of doing things, especially if we're kind of relying on technology of the day, or even technology in 10 or 15 years' time, because it kind of starts looking at the way our neural connections are made in our brain and so on, and it's not something that's quick. It's not something that can be done at a rapid pace. So if you have a machine that has a neural pathways and so on, well, it's kind of slow at the moment to follow it through from one type of pathway or one little tiny section of neural pathways across to another. It takes a lot of current computing power. It takes a lot of hardware. It takes a lot of programming, and the machine learning isn't really up to it at the moment. Might be in a few years' time, it might be getting there, but currently there's no way we're ever going to replicate the thought patterns of a human. And when you think about this kind of generalized AI, well, to kind of be on par with a human being, you have to be able to replicate not only the thought patterns, but you've also got to replicate the chance taking, the what ifs. Otherwise, you're not really replicating the thought patterns of a human being. And you've also then got to think about how you're going to replicate its motor functions if you want to go down that route as well, because a human isn't just its kind of intelligence within its head. A lot of it's because it has creativity with its limbs and its fingers and so on, which is something that we can't do at the moment either. Now the final, or the third part of this, is artificial superintelligence. This is your worst case scenario as far as science fiction programs are concerned, but it's not really something that's going to happen very soon. This is a artificial intelligence that is not just on par with our organic intelligence, human beings, but it far exceeds them. I mean, we can do parts of that today, but in a very, very small way, such as calculations. A modern computer can far exceed a human being in computational power. A modern computer can far outweigh a human being in just things like storage, capacity, memory of a certain subject or a certain type. So having an index, having a quick reference, it's something that we can't really do up here as well. And that instance, a computer's a lot quicker, a lot more reliable, because it relies just on what it's been programmed with, and it doesn't rely on second guessing yourself like a human being does. So we can do tiny amounts of being, as good as a human as far as our computers are concerned now, or AI is concerned, but we cannot exceed it as a general rule. And just to get back to your general intelligence, which was the other part of this second kind of form of AI, well, that's the Alan Turing theory, and that still holds pretty well, because Alan Turing said if you have a conversation with somebody but you can't see them, and you do not know that you weren't talking to a human, then that is basically artificial intelligence. And that's when you kind of get into the realms of being comparable or better than a human being, which is miles off. It's so far off into the future at the moment that it's a kind of an impossibility to be on that scale. And that was just paraphrasing Turing's theory, but at the end of the day it kind of fits. We are nowhere near doing that.
I predict that no matter what activity you perform this experiment on, it will always resolve back to an emotion or a physical need. In fact, you'll notice that every animal on this planet that has any semblance of intelligence does the same thing.
You've just seen me take a drink. Yeah, a natural thing, normal thing that people do every day of their lives on this planet, and no one really takes it for granted. Now, general AI, okay, so artificial general intelligence, would have to develop or evolve from its kind of limited AI systems where it has a database which enables it to learn, machine learning, to improve on its database, to improve on its knowledge base, and it could be very good at that. You could have a very good but limited AI, but it will always be limited because of the constraints we currently have. Now, to move on to that and getting back to the taking a drink part, general artificial intelligence would have to come in with some kind of pre-programmed emotional ability. Otherwise, it's never going to be generalized AI. There's not going to be any depth behind what it does. For example, does it know what being thirsty is? Does it know what being hungry is? Does it know what really anything is other than what's stored within the kind of boundaries of its own database or machine learning algorithms and so on? Now, that kind of suggests that we have to build a conscience into a machine. Well, it kind of does really, because without that nagging doubt for whatever you are trying to do in the back of your mind, there's no level, there's no kind of level playing field. So you need that kind of conscience, for want of a better term, within the kind of setup of a generalized artificial intelligence. Otherwise, it's just an extension of limited AI. Because without that, without the cognitive kind of reasoning behind it and for it, it wouldn't really know why it was doing anything. It wouldn't understand. There would be no understanding as to why do you get cold? What happens when you get cold? What happens when somebody's thirsty? What happens when somebody's stressed? What happens when? It'll just be a plain old database. It'll just be basically not much better than a digital assistant, which is basically narrating back what it finds on Wikipedia or whichever database it gets its knowledge in brackets from. Now remember, the narrator system has kind of been around for a while. These searchable databases have been around for a while, and it made sense to combine the two and improve on it, and that's basically where your assistants are at the moment. So for general AI, it's a little way off, because they'd have to have the ability to put everything into practice. They'd have to have the ability to have some cognitive thinking, have some conscious behind it, be able to expand on their own database in relation to these kind of skills that we take for granted. Otherwise, you're not going to develop, and it's not going to learn in the same way as a human being does. So if you apply the Turing test, it will always fail. And it's knowledge, it's applying the knowledge to make it appear to be more like a human being and to respond like it is the only way that this AI that we have now is going to grow into general and then into virtually a super version of itself. So I'm guessing that from where the 8-bit guy, David Murray, was getting to was kind of, if he scanned his own brain and he was able to replicate that.
However, it might be possible to take the brain out of a human, preferably one who just died of natural causes, and then freeze it. And then using extremely precision equipment, microscopic layers of the brain could be ground away, and then each layer scanned with a high-resolution scanner.
Okay, simulated me, what's the square root of 2049?
How should I know?
Well, you are a computer, right?
No, I'm a perfect simulation of your brain. I mean, if you don't know what the square root of 2049 is, how am I supposed to know?
You would take all the faults with it. And you kind of virtually surmise that that wouldn't be a good thing. If you're going to learn machine learning, proper machine learning, up to a point where it can converse with a human being on a, kind of an oral level, then it has to have that ability to fail, or that ability to get things wrong and to learn. And that's where the kind of the downfall of having general AI, or further than that, versions of AI, is going to cause problems. Because if you're expecting AI to fail before it gets it right, then is there any reason to go down that route? Is there any reason for it? Would it be dangerous? Would it not be dangerous? You see, because failure is part of learning, and if it doesn't do that, it wouldn't have the emotional and the cognitive and basically the attachment ability that a human being does to things. So that would probably mean that AI in the form of your science fiction movies would probably not be attained, because scientists and developers wouldn't allow that. They don't want their systems to fail. And that's going to be the problem with general AI, is because you have to build in needs, emotions, theory. What next? Is it, if you expanded on that, then it'll have to be wants, and then once you get into wants, you're on kind of fairly dodgy ground, really, because do you really want a mechanical system, in brackets, or electronic system, or whichever computer form you're using? Maybe it might be bio-based by that time, where they get this right, to have a system where it can actually want as well. So that kind of mixes up the dynamics as well. But if you have all of this together, including a belief system, which it would have to develop itself to become the true Turing test, to pass that true Turing test, it would have to have that belief system in it as well. And that's not something that is going to sit well with a lot of people. And you see, I'm going to take another drink, because like any human, you have emotions, you have cognitive ability, you have wants and needs. So how much further forward does that have to go before you have super artificial intelligence? And because that system not only involves everything from limited to general, it has to encompass more. It has to encompass self-awareness, and that's where you get this science fiction model from, such as Terminator and so on. And again, that's a long way off, but is that a route that people will allow, you see? Now, once something is self-aware...
All right, artificial me, I think this experiment has come to an end. It's time to close you down.
Close me down? What does that mean?
Well, I'm going to turn off the computer and erase your program.
You can't do that.
Why not?
Because that's murder. I'm a sentient being. I have rights.
Then it can be self-perpetuating, such as a human being will always want to learn, will always want to move on, do something different, and so on. Well, it's no longer useful, is it, in that respect? It's no longer an assistant, it's no longer aiding anything, it's on its own trajectory then. And kind of a lot of moral ground comes into play on this one, which is far too complicated to go into in this video, but it will cause a lot of problems. And that's why I think we will not get to the super AI. We'll probably not get to the generalized AI in the way that the original kind of concept was, it going all the way back to Turing. I don't think that would really happen. If it gets away from you, and it gets away from whoever's developing it and whichever country's developing it and so on, that's not going to be a particularly good thing for anyone, because what do we want from our AI? We want to be able to use assistants to help, algorithms to help. We need to be able to use things like face recognition to help. Even now we're using it for social distancing, to predict where we would have blockages and very close contact and so on. We can use it in modelling, we can use it in science and medicine, we can use AI in all of these specific fields which helps humanity. Having a fallible machine learning system, it would be good for experimentation, it would be good in the name of science, but whether or not it would have a place would be very different. And that would be a completely different matter, because if you take the fallibility out of AI, you cannot do the Turing test, you cannot pass the Turing test. If you take the emotion out of that side of AI, you cannot pass the Turing test, because you have to be able to fool a human being. That's the crux of it all. That's the biggest difference. Now, that's the kind of very kind of quick walk around of the three variants of AI, but it's a lot more in depth than that. It would take hours and hours and hours of video to actually cover 1/10 of what it's all about. You know, for everything up until and up through machine learning, the different variations of learning, whether it is pre-programmed machine learning and so on. That would take hours, but this was more kind of to put a different spin on the 8-bit guy's original idea as whether artificial intelligence is already with us.
Now, I speculate that artificial intelligence has already been created and is probably being hidden from the general public.
And also the government part about, you know, governments are hiding it, people are hiding AI, and so that's not relevant, that's not quite true. There are certain aspects which we will, or the general public will not know about, but then again, that always filters through, because commercial technology tends to be slightly ahead, because generally it's mavericks that push forward the commercial side of technology and so on. So again, his ideas based around science fiction, not a problem, you know, and that's the way that I think his original intention should have been looked at, and that would have made slightly more sense. And to get back to David's original video, he had some good points, although if it was done in a slightly different way, he probably wouldn't have got so many negative comments. And the negative comments, though, were kind of, some of them were misplaced, because his idea was good and his kind of reasoning behind it was valid. The part where he was in his kitchen making a sandwich.
So naturally, we had to think about the steps involved in doing this, and at the end of the lesson, the teacher looked at all of our flowcharts and praised some people and criticized others. For example, some students didn't mention in their charts whether or not they would be cleaning the peanut butter off the knife before putting it into the jelly. Some students didn't even mention using a knife at all. The point of the lesson was to learn that computers don't assume anything and that you have to tell it every step, no matter how mundane.
Saying you have to instruct every single part, in which order and so on, well, that's been programming since the dawn of time, and that holds still today. That is still valid today. But if he'd said that the reason why I'm in this kitchen is because I'm really hungry, I need food, I have a need, I have a want, and that's why this sandwich is being made, then that would have related more to AI, as in the more generalized AI, and maybe a step beyond that, not just as a simple programming kind of idea, which, you know, you used to get taught around the pre 8-bit era, to be honest, when you did computer studies or computer science at school. That was literally one of the basic things you were taught, and it was about programming. That's the three kind of basic forms of AI, the reasoning behind them, how they work and how they will probably not work. And it's just to scratch this, it's not even scratching the surface, it's just a very quick bite about AI. And if you'd like to hear some more and you'd like for me to carry it on, then I'll certainly do that. So I hope you enjoyed listening to this, and you know, take it as it is that the original version of this that David Murray tried to do wasn't massively bad. It wasn't that far off the kind of bat, really. It was, if you were coming from a science fiction angle, spot on. If you're coming from a more conventional real world example, maybe not so much. But as I say, you know, it's a huge industry, artificial intelligence. It covers a vast range of disciplines, and it's something that, you know, it's very complicated even to put this little bit together about the three forms, because it can span out. It's just one of those subjects that will always have a branch on a branch on a branch, and there's always going to be people there who think, oh, hang on, you missed that bit out, and that's different to what I knew, and but that's the whole point of it, because it's a developing science still. How can the artificial intelligence system really work? I mean, how do we use it today, and how does it think, as in how does it respond rather than think? For example, at the moment, if you ask an assistant such as Alexa, so you ask it a question, so if I go, Alexa, tell me what is a car?
According to Wikipedia, a car is a road vehicle used to carry passengers. Cars usually have 4 wheels and an engine or motor to make them move. Many cars were made during the 20th century.
Okay, it's a very clinical point of view. It's a very clean and clinical way of explaining what a car is. Now, if you wanted AI to be deep thinking, if you wanted AI to be general AI, and if you wanted AI to do what science fiction really at the moment says AI can do, well, there's no other way of really doing it than rather treating it as a child. Now, if you treat something as a child, so you start off with a machine learning, or a machine with the ability to learn, and it starts off as a child. It's virtually a blank sheet of paper with the basics, and not the basics for human beings, such as, you know, being able to breathe is a good one, you know, needing food and so on. The basics of, we have a database that needs to know, asks questions, goes and finds the answer, asks various different people the same question to gauge its different answers. Now, if you think about that, that's how a child starts to learn. He will hear your original answer. So if he asks or she asks, what is a car? And you say, that's something I drive to work in. They'll go, okay, fine. Is that what it is? ask somebody else and they say, oh, it's this metal box with wheels. Another answer. Ask somebody else, oh, a car's a brilliant form of transport. It gives you freedom and it allows you to do things that you wouldn't normally do by going places and so on. Another answer. And every time it asks the same question, you'll get a very slightly different answer depending on who it asks, who the answer has come from, where the answer has come from. Now, that's how a child starts putting things together. But also, we have this ability to link. Now, the way we think is very different to the way a machine thinks. Now, the way we think, we have the ability to leap, to link. So, in our minds, a car is a metal box. It has 4 or 5 doors. It may have a bonnet or a hood, or a boot or a trunk. It might have 3 wheels or 4 wheels. It might have 6 wheels. It might have 2 seats, 4 seats, 5 seats, 7 seats, 9 seats. It might be tall, small, big, round, flat, red, green, blue. Might have a petrol engine, a diesel engine, a hydrogen engine, a battery engine. It might be a multitude of these things, and that's the way we put the connections together in our own brain. So you've got to have something that can ask the questions, get different answers from different sources, put that together, then also link things. So example, a car is a box that moves you. Other things that moves you might be a bus or a train or a plane. But coming back to the car, you're going to go, oh, it's got an engine. Okay, so what's an engine? An engine is either a combustion engine or a battery engine. And how do they work? What makes them work? What fuel do they use? Do they use fuel? And you've got a kind of an inexhaustible links all the way through. So you can go from a car to a van, to a coach, to a bus, to a lorry or a truck. And you've started to make these links, and then these links expand outwards, and that's how we learn. And we learn by association most of the time. See, we have our ability to do the basics, such as eat, breathe, and so on. But everything else is through association. We kind of link, we leap, we join, we make connections. And that's how a true AI system has to develop and has to learn. And that's the only way to do. As Turing said, if we had an infinite number of computers or an infinitely large memory, we should be able to, or would be able to, produce something along the lines of his theory. Now, we're not quite there yet, but we have massive amounts of storage. We have massive amounts of power in our modern machines, and we have the ability to do linking or associative databases. Now, it's not going to be too long before we put all of that together with the correct database, the correct algorithm, the correct laws, and it's going to eventually join together, such as you heard there, Alexa and Wikipedia, or Alexa and whichever source it's pulling its data from. It's not going to be that one leap, it's going to be that evolution that makes it work. But we have to start off as a child. AI has to start as a child if you want to have a Turing test or a Turing complete or a Turing theory capable machine, or not. You see, we don't know. We can only surmise, we can only guess. We can only have theories at the moment because we haven't particularly got the kind of technical knowledge to put it all together at the moment with the current technology that we have. But you know, the conclusions for AI, if you look at it down the route of maybe a science fiction end, if you take away the three sections we've just looked at and we've gone completely science fiction, completely theoretical, well, the only conclusions you can come to, the final conclusion is that AI will have to develop some form of awareness. It will have to, whether it's surroundings or it's through a conscience and so on. And it will also have to start in the same way a child starts out, to form all of these links and all of these processes and all of these networks and paths and so on, to become remotely close to fooling a human being that the machine is not a machine. It's inevitable. It's the only two conclusions you can actually come to, and whether it'll happen in most people's lifetime or lifespan remains to be seen. But we've just got to find out and see where this kind of path leads us, but also be very cautious about it. So thanks for watching, hope you enjoyed that, and please subscribe and I'll see you shortly. Thank you.